when I read the your writings on existential independence, I was reminded by something T.S. Eliot said. He said something that guided you into that conversation. I'm talking about the little quote which he said, "We shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of all of all our exploring, we will be aware where we began and know the place for the first time." And that has very strongly resonated with me, what you wrote in that mail. So I wondered whether that was some kind of trigger or guide or what have you. Thanks.
No, I haven't heard that that before, not consciously at least. There was no, my trigger or guide is trying to make sense of this strange thing called life. So today we're here to talk about intellectual independence, what that might mean for us. And again, we have Hermann in South Africa, Lucas, Lebanon, Till, and me in Germany, Jerry on Mallorca, and Lihi from Israel. So a beautiful mixture. Even two neighbors, Lucas and Lihi. So because I have already written something, I would like to pass for the first round, pass the word over to Hermann to begin. And then Hermann, please pass it on to the next person until everybody's done. And after that, we do a open round. So focus on intellectual independence, and here we go.
Well, if I get challenged with a statement that is, in a sense, not something I'm thinking about every day, so I do a bit of a preparation, like for today's meeting, and came to the realization that it was my intellectual independence that actually made me, in a way, an outsider in the corporate environment. Because one thing I've always had a problem with, and I believe that is part of intellectual independence, is not necessarily to conform. Keeping an open mind, being willing to be challenged, but at the same time challenge others just as much. And in good German big corporations, I don't know how it works today because I left the corporate environment about 30 odd years ago. I don't know how it works today, but in good old German corporations, you did not do that. You conformed, they were bosses. It was a fairly strict hierarchy, which you were supposed to observe. Despite that, I was successful in my career, just as a side remark, so it didn't damage me too much. But when I reached situations and positions where you really had to conform in order to progress further, I stepped out of the corporate environment. For me, also intellectual independence is accepting responsibility for what I think, for what I do, and also be the initiator of thoughts and actions that contribute to my personal belief system, to my existence in general. And I think a strong component of intellectual independence is actually knowledge seeking. And despite my advanced age of well over 80, I'm learning not necessarily something new every day, but definitely 4 to 6 times a week. And I climb into things which were completely unknown to me before. I shared the other day with a friend that at the age of 80, I learned a new language, namely the language of agriculture, which until that time was completely or more or less unknown to me. And it's a space I've been moving in for the last 3 to 4 years. I think one of the, in order to really stay intellectually independent, is to minimize spontaneity in certain things. I mean, I have been very strongly leaning towards shooting from my hip. And that's not always the best thing. And it doesn't speak for intellectual independence, that's for sure. So if I have a challenge today, I either sleep a night over or sit down, write a bit of a reflection and let it kind of mature inside, and only if provided something important, and only kind of engage a couple of hours later. That's my contribution so far for tonight. Thank you. Oh, one thing I think which is also important is the expanse of language. I think will contribute to intellectual independence. Just to repeat it, I think I quoted it once before, that Ludwig Wittgenstein said, the limit of my language is the limit of my world. And I believe strongly that to be the case. And if I want to be intellectually independent, as I said, the expanse of my language is critical, or at least is extremely helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Hermann. Who should go next?
Sorry, Till.
Okay, I haven't prepared for this, but I'm just gonna shoot for what comes to mind. I think for me, yeah, maybe a big question mark or challenge I see in this entire topic of intellectual independence is related to something you wrote, Thomas, in your email about reasoning from first principles. But I think it's maybe I can also connect it to parts of what you now said, Hermann. Where you talked about the corporate world and being kind of forced to fit in, and I think for me a big challenge lies in the question, where is it important and where is it possible to get to intellectual independence and reason from first principles, and where is it actually also helpful or even needed to rely on what others have thought about before, what others have constructed already, because we live in this like super complex world where basically no one can know everything, and every one of us is very like specialized and needs to stay like in a narrow in a smaller and a narrow part of the entire system that like we have built up intellectually. And I think for me I think expanding this is super important, and I think reasoning from first principles is something that I believe is important to push the entire society and humanity further, but also for our own growth it's important. But at the same time, if you start going back to first principles on everything in your life, you won't get anywhere, I believe. And also I think it's obviously a lot more exhausting. It takes a lot more energy and time and space. So I think for me there's a huge question around, where should I focus this energy? In which moments, in which areas does it actually make sense to go back to first principles? And where is it good also to rely on what is already there, what has been built up by many people who are probably a lot smarter than me, and maybe have a lot more background knowledge, a lot more expertise, scientists, whoever, who have actually brought us to the point we are now. So I think, yeah, maybe that is the key question for me and from my perspective. Yeah, I think that's it. And I'm gonna pass on to Lucas.
Thank you, Till. Yeah, so I'm trying to make some links in my mind of what I heard so far. So what, yeah, I want to dive a little bit into that topic of control spontaneity, Hermann, that you said, like, okay, like independence, intellectual independence means also to control the spontaneity of the thoughts. And I think there's something very smart and very, very wise in there. But I don't want to agree completely, because I think the spontaneity of my thought is my independence and is my freedom, as long as it's not based and on prejudice or on closed boxes. So I totally understand what you mean by saying, okay, don't shoot from the hip and just give answer an argument with something that comes out of your emotions or anything, but give it some time to objectify your thoughts as well. And I totally agree with this. On the other hand, the spontaneity is as well like a result of me being independent to some arguments. So that means, like, I have maybe another opinion, another idea about it, and I should then add it to an argument. So this is for me as well spontaneity. Yeah, that just came up in my mind. And so with this as well, to answer to Till, or to add to Till's idea, be okay repeating already thought through ideas, because they might be scientifically proven, or something that I cannot come up with my whole in my whole lifetime, but as well be ready to challenge them as well, to say, okay, that might be the canon right now, but I want to challenge it as well. And this is as well spontaneity for me. So another idea or thought that I had during this week was right now a lot of people face the challenge to homeschool their kids. And my wife and me, we were thinking about, why isn't there kind of a main curriculum for kids till the age of 10 or till the age of 11, a high value produced already in every language all around of the world, that helps kids all over the world to have like a base curriculum of what it means to think freely. So literacy about the world. And why is it so hard right now for all the governments to push out homeschooling content, if we should have it till now urgently, like a base curriculum for free thinking for kids. So I just want to drop in this, because that should be easy and it can be reproduced and just dubbed in new languages. So this is, yeah, I don't know. Yeah. And I hand over to Lee.
Sorry. So nice to meet all of you guys. So I love this question and what the challenge it poses. And what I hear, we put it together as one word, but actually we're talking about, intellectual and independence. And for me, the first question is, what do we mean when we talk about intellectual independence? And for most of us, we know, deep down, we know that it may be a contradiction in terms, right? Our patterns in our minds, a lot of them are kind of brought to us and taught. If we were raised alone in a forest and weren't taught language and constructs and analytical concepts, they are the ones, the pathways that design how we think and what is our intellectual kind of thought. And one of the things that I miss in the word intellectual, it kind of resonates to logic and rationality, and it does miss the emotional side. So that's the one question. Then the question is, what is independence? And for me, just on my personal note, the way I looked at intellectual independence is the ability to truly, honestly ask questions and not necessarily get to answers, but to ask the questions. And the flip side of intellectual independence would be basically set identities, structures, culture, people who tell you this is who you are and this is how you think and this give you answers. And the flip side of it is to ask, is this who I am? Are these the answers? And I really connect to what Helman mentioned with language, because language is not only the language we speak. There is a corporate language, and there's a nonprofit language. And I've been all my career and all my life been avoiding very actively and consciously being put in a box, so that people think, oh, you're that. I moved around countries as a young person. I think that also helps. You see different cultures and languages and perspectives when you move back as a young person to a culture that is supposed to be yours and you ask questions. There's no room for that typically. So this idea of being put in boxes that don't give you space to ask the questions is really, I think, the internal challenge of saying, like, yes, I can be many things. I can look at stuff in multiple ways and not be in a certain box. And I think the language is a much deeper question than what larger language we talk about, but the language in which we operate. If we are in the tech world, there's a language. I worked in international development, humanitarian aid, conflict resolution, there's a language. I worked in business and corporate, there's a different language. And each of these have these intellectual constructs that you have to abide. And I guess what I think is the way to reach, and we never will reach intellectual independence, I think, but the way to strive for it is really through understanding what these patterns and construct of the culture or identity or language you're in, and to wonder if they fit you and if they're good, if they're harmful. If they're harmless and, then they add flavor, but if they're harmful, then that's what motivates me to try and challenge them. Oh, and we have Jerry.
Yes, thank you very much, Lee. First of all, I want to apologize in advance. The youngest of my 4 children, Sienna, she's turning 15 today, and we're actually having an illegal party upstairs starting in 35 minutes. So in 35 minutes, I'm gonna dash to cut the cake, I guess. I think there's 7 members in the household, which is completely illegal, but we'll try to hide inside, and we have escape routes out the back. Actually, when Sienna was 3, we traveled around the world for a year and met a lot of people who did homeschooling and unschooling. Unschooling is also very popular. And Lucas, I can confirm that they all try to figure it out for themselves, right? Nobody had a book. So you just gave me, I already have the logo. You just gave me the business idea, the Freedom of Thought School. It's a beautiful idea. Somebody needs to do it, right? I mean, I love the whole thing. And in a way, freedom of thought to me is also intellectual independence. I don't know. I guess I'm sort of interpreting it for me as, you know, gaining enough knowledge or having enough, having done enough reading and inquiry to have my own point of view, or to have the liberty to have my own version of the truth, I guess, is a little bit intellectual independence. And I find that incredibly difficult these days, because I'm being hijacked left, right, and center by videos, images that all seem real. And I also find that, you know, if I take 100 people around me, they all have a slightly different versions of the truth. Actually, some of them have a dramatically different version of the truth, but they all have a slightly different version of it. And so, you know, I find it incredibly hard for me to even, I guess, form a point of view with confidence on subjects. And part of what I had to learn, I always thought I knew everything, or you know, at least I was entitled to have an opinion. But I learned in the last year, it's probably one of the biggest things I learned, is to embrace ambiguity and uncertainty. I'm quite happy to be uncertain on certain topics, and I'm actually quite happy to have that vulnerability that I don't know. I just don't have the intellectual background or capacity to have an opinion on certain things. I think the biggest thing that comes to mind for me with intellectual independence is Harari with Under the Skin. And, you know, in a way, the picture that he has painted recently is, you know, this being our biggest challenge, us losing our intellectual independence. And I'm thinking as the first stage of me having a Neuralink chip with 100 wires. And the first step is I just say download Chinese, right? Download Mandarin. And that's a voluntary act that I do. And I'm increasing, in theory, my intellectual capacity by just basically having a whole bunch of neurons over here instantly programmed to learn Mandarin. So in a way, I would have independence because I made a conscious choice. But as we all know, the next step of this is that I get downloads that I didn't ask for. and you know, that's a topic that's high up in my mind. And I think that's at the core of many of the sort of AI discussions, right? Is at what stage do I lose independence over my own intellect? In other words, you know, my thoughts are being controlled from outside. You know, they're already being manipulated by all kinds of things, by media and so on. But what if I start having wires going into me? Let's take the whole 5G Bill Gates chip thing out of this, which is obviously a wild story. Let's take the real thing of wires from Elon Musk, because he's shown us that it can be done, right? And I think that's you know, Harari is always a bit too pessimistic for me, and I'm much more of an optimist when it comes to the future and life. But he's, you know, it's obviously a very important time to bring this up, right? Where, you know, when do we lose our intellectual independence, and what can we do to ensure that I can always be in charge of the operating system that filters the wires? So with that, I want to pass on to Falk. Unless Falk is
yeah, Falk is here, and Falk is in a very, very bad emotional situation right now, because I had to do with a communication issue. And this communication issue was when a best friend of mine wrote to the court. It's a business stuff, right? She wrote to the court, yes, I cannot reach my lawyer, and we take back our what is the word in English? Klage. In the civilian process. Anyways, we retire from our claim. And you know, I spent about half a year it's a really delicate issue because we have a counterclaim against us. And if we just rescind from this one and don't fight the counterclaim, then it was several months of preparation was really just crossed through the line. And I was like, how can my best friend do this? So, and this is these connotations of actions, what I'm thinking. So it to me, to her, to my best friend, it was like, yeah, I'm progressive, I'm helping. And to me, it was the total insult. Yeah. I think it has to do with this issue of we can oversee things in only a subjective way. So I saw things and worked on things which I didn't communicate. And then it leads to activities which lead to complications. And there we stand. I loved your example of Zhongguanhua, Gary, with the Mandarin Chinese download. But then all these other aspects of a culture, they also affect us. So I think it's difficult to really select. We have to take the black and the white color. That's what I just said in my mind.
Thank you, Falk. For this, Lucas, just 1 second.
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
I would like to do a little binding, and then we will open it for everyone. Because what I heard was there were some common threads here, and the way I interpreted them was that we're somehow pattern-seeking machines, and we are striving to widen the interface with the world in order to see more patterns, but maybe also to be able to communicate more patterns. So I don't agree with Wittgenstein totally, because I can feel much more inside, even if I cannot express it. But the expressibility is my interface with the outside world. And usually we use words, sometimes we use art. Art might convey some other dimensions that we cannot use with words. But we're not only pattern-seeking machines, we're also coherence-seeking machines. So somehow intellectual independence seems to be linked with the ability of accepting coherence breakdown and striving towards coherence at the same time. Or to use Mark Andreessen's bio line on Twitter, strong views weakly held, right? So we're trying to put the patterns we see into a coherent whole, and if we, through our spontaneity and interaction with the world, see that this might break down, we allow that breakdown and reconfiguration of the contents of our mind actively, because we see that the pattern matching and the coherence doesn't add up anymore. And being able to do that, I think also is linked, as he said, with emotional strength or independence even. That you can let go of the structures in your mind, invisible structures in your mind. Yeah, I don't know if that makes total sense, and but I hope I touched upon the lines I heard, and yeah, I'd like to pass it over to Lucas with that.
Yeah, super nice, because it sums it it sums it up super nicely. Yeah, patterns, coherence. That's so when Jerry asked the question, when am I losing my independence, like downloading knowledge and all this stuff? So I like one motive, like musically motive, came up in my mind that said, like, okay, it's about hope. Getting stuck in knowledge and all these patterns and coherence that gives me that is given to me through knowledge, blocks my passageway through thinking another future or thinking it differently, wishing it differently. Then I lose my independence, I think. So my independence intellectually is to say, even though there is a lot of knowledge and facts and physics and whatever, I am free to imagine futures the way that I think they should be. So this is I think that's where it comes to. So I'm free to let go of structures in my mind and say, okay, all these facts, I have to consider them, but I can recombine them in a way that I think it's desirable or something. So this is my independence, and this is where I, keep it as an individual. And so like there's this one philosopher and theologist in Germany called Georg Picht, and he wrote a book that's called Mut zur Utopie, so Courage to Utopia. And he said there's three ways of thinking the future. The one is prognosis, the other is plan, and the third way is utopia. And when I'm going with prognosis, that's based on facts, and but sometimes just in a small scope. But I have to go with it because it tells me where it will be going, and I cannot add my unique or unique thinking to it. If I go with a plan, I have to make up like we know it all. The agile world says like plans don't work. It's about constant planning. But utopia, it's about hoping and creating a picture of how it should be. And this is independence. If I have the literacy to think futures and imagine them the way they should be desirable, then I'm independent. Yeah, just sorry for making it up very big, but that came up to my mind.
I wanted to come back to Thomas' remark about Wittgenstein and language. I agree with you. Just to explain my background, I trained in ontological coaching a couple of years ago, and we work on the way of being. And there are three major tools we use. One is language, the other one is the physical body, but possibly most importantly, the third one is emotions. And Thomas, you know a little bit about my background and my story. And yes, in as much as I don't want to kill spontaneity, Lucas, that's why I think I mentioned that I'm referring to complex kind of issues where I need to sit back and reflect. If we kill spontaneity, I kill something that is, in a positive sense, so human. But going back to language, without bringing my feelings in, even if
I'm not hearing Hermann anymore.
and facial, oh,
Yeah,
can't
you
hear
just
me.
had a dropout.
Okay, can you hear me
Maybe
now?
you repeat the last 2-3 sentences, maybe.
Yeah, I said even in my language, I bring feelings in. For example, I think often demonstrate my passion that I have, not only in the gestures and facial expressions, but the way I express them as well. So I think for me, combining, for example, the language with feeling is critical, and to express a full picture of whatever it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Herman. I wanted to pick up on the utopia, Lucas. I totally agree. And I would argue that, well, this is maybe too generalizing, but most men always try to be like rational and, you know, extrapolating the data and so on. And this is where the beautiful energy of the women comes in, because they are much better at adding intuition and emotion to things like, you know, a vision for the future. So to me, utopia is a lot about obviously thinking outside of the box, but also about dreaming and imagination, right? Just imagining things that they might not be logical according to the laws of physics or to what I've learned, but they're just why not let this is what I would like. And yeah, I just wanted to bring in here the I know I've said it before, I think, but the Vishen-Lakhiani bending reality graph, which basically says the happiest people are those who are happy in the now and who have a vision for the future. So if you lack either of those, you're stuck somewhere else. And if you have both of those, you can actually bend reality, which means you can create the world that you want, right? So I like the utopia thing. And in a way, Lucas, I agree. As long as we are, I guess, if we feel that we are permitted to imagine our own version of a future world, then that is a little bit of intellectual independence. I would agree with that.
If it's okay, one thing I would add, I really connect to the utopia side, but so in part of my background is really studying philosophy and ethics, and I would say the key questions when I think about intellectual independence is on ethical questions, not in terms of people just thinking, having opinions on certain stuff, but when it actually has implications on behaviors, on choices, on life, and society. And that's when we wonder about the importance of intellectual independence. And I mean, in theory, if a society, you know, everyone had different religions and believe in completely different things, but their actions were all aligned, it wouldn't matter so much. So for me, the question beyond the utopia, and utopia also has an ethical question, because it is, what is the good society? What is the right society? How ought we live? And that is usually based on our belief system. And I remember one of my first classes in my first degree in philosophy was about this question of how do we know something is true? And if we go to religion or we go to science, the claim is you can ask someone, you can have the rational deconstruction of asking for each argument, but why do you think that? And then someone will answer because of that. Okay, but why do you think that? And if you go back enough, the last answer to the why would be because that feels right. Why is killing bad? And we can have all these rational conversations about why killing is bad and evolutionary and so on. But in the end, if we go back to the knowledge we have, it's an emotional drive that this is wrong. Our ethical kind of discussion, which has to do with our intellectual independence, in the end, go back to the initial deep belief that I believe we all share. So for me, one of the things that I always worry about is to get to a point where the opinions are so fragmented. And as Gary said, you can't even talk to someone, let alone you have to like suspend judgment on anyone, is that we go to a kind of a postmodern dystopia where there is no shared morals and ethical convictions, because everyone's allowed their own opinion. And I think there's always a pull between having full intellectual independence, but then also converging to a shared right one. There is an assumption that there is the right, there is the truth. And if you let go of that, then all chaos happens. So I think that there's the tension there is between allowing freedom of thought and intellectual independence and pushing for it, but then also trying to converge through rational thinking, through let's have shared answers to why this and why that, which will lead us to an utopia. So it just, I really connected the utopic feeling, but more about it has ethical considerations today and our moral judgment today, not only in our utopic vision to the future.
Yeah, maybe I can also add something to that. So I think, yeah, a theme of what most of us have also now brought up is, I think, the question of agency and also free will. So in the end, can we, if we have the freedom, then we can also make choices and we can change behavior, we can act and so on. And I think maybe related to what you now said, Lee, I think it's a big part of yeah, whether intellectual independence or independence in general will lead to maybe a more utopian world. For me is the question whether people have agency. So I think Gary, you brought up this idea of downloading a language and at some point not being able to decide what is being downloaded anymore. And I think to a degree we already have this case, right, where like an AI powers an algorithm and decides what we see and so on, and we are being manipulated in certain ways. So I think having the agency to really understand if certain things are our own decision or if someone is manipulating us, I think that is something that is so crucial for intellectual independence, that in the end also yeah, benefits us and the people around us, the community. And I think, Lee, you in your first contribution, you talked about something being harmful or harmless, and yeah, this kind of being the important question to ask when you want to decide if you want to challenge something or not. And I think being able to identify if something is harmful or harmless to yourself and to others is so crucial to then decide, do I want to challenge something, and am I actually making this decision, yeah, out of independence or out of manipulation in the end?
But the question is also, I think, are we truly intellectually independent? Or maybe we arrive our independence through interdependence? Because we got to somehow form opinions, learning things, in many ways through others. So A, is there intellectual independence? And B, if there is, where does it come from? Does it come from an intellectual interdependence?
I'd like to build on both your comments and combine that with Jerry's comment in the chat. If I imagine the space of my intellectual independence, as a two-dimensional space, and I overlay that with the intellectual independence space of all of you, we will have probably a 90% overlap. So I think there is a more commonality between our subjective experience of what intellectual independence means then there's not, right? Some of us might have, might bend the far east corner a little bit more of our two-dimensional space of our intellectual independence, and some of us might bend some other corner more. But the general, there's a lot of space that we agree on. So I think we can combine those two. Where it becomes tricky, and I think that's where we achieve a new or a true independence, or a new level of independence, is where we have to accept not knowing, where we have to accept that knowing, or our construction of our intellectual world of our knowing, turns into belief or magic, where we have to feel, believe, trust, but we cannot know. And this border is usually much more relevant for our interdependence and our collective sense making than all of the vast amount of overlap that we have. And I think going into this direction and seeing how we can use these conflicts that arise from there to our benefit, that might be something useful to look at. Sorry, I didn't mean to overwhelm everyone.
Because I'm going to have to go to the party in a second, but I wanted to breach another thing, which is, I don't know where I'm going with this, but if I look at my children, you know, they in theory have all intellectual knowledge at their fingertips, right? With Siri's, they have a much different relationship to Siri than we do. They think it's a normal person, right? So for them, also the step to downloading knowledge, they don't have to know anything. They will just ask it eventually. Either they ask it into their phone or their wristband, or they ask it in their head, and they will get an instant answer. So what I constantly hear now from, I guess, educational professionals as well, is, where does this leave us? Well, we're changing our teaching now, and we're changing actually to teach them to understand concepts and reasoning and relationships between things. So more the strategic element of things, right? Or I guess it could be imagining a utopia or whatever. So in a way, it's changed dramatically from when I went to school, right? I mean, I was just like drill, learn. But these days, in a way, it's been democratized for 8 billion people. We all have access to vast amounts of knowledge. And I guess the whole concept of an intellect is different, that it's in a positive, if I want to frame it positively, it's now not so much storing stuff on my hard drive anymore. I'm more developing, what do I do with all the stuff that's out there, the overwhelming amount of information? So how do I build a filter, and how do I make the best out of it? And coming back to Lehe, how do I make sure that this, whatever people do with all this stuff, converges in some kind of ethical common ground that we can find, right? Because otherwise everybody veers off into wherever they want to veer off. That's a dystopia. That's not a utopia. Anyway, yeah.
Thank you, Jerry, for showing up in case you have to leave soon.
Yep. And thank you.
Enjoy.
I really want to add to Jerry's thought, because like having this basic literacy for understanding concepts and continuing to think about them. That's kind of what comes to me after listening to Jerry. Is something where I loop back to my first statement. Why don't we have kind of this basic curriculum that teaches kids how to make stuff out of knowledge and continue with it? So like you need to know how to learn, you need to know how to calculate, and you need to know where to find stuff and how to raise an argument and kind of create logic, and then be independent, start thinking for yourself. So this is and you need to kind of have a universally agreed on basic ethical compass, maybe that. So what else do you need to kind of explore and the world and make it yours as a kid, as a thinking entity, as an intellectual entity? So what do you need to be independent? This is, and to make everyone having the same capability of being independent. This is a question that is raised in my mind right now.
I would like to take on that part, because we are independent as long as we are not interdependent. As long as we start to be interdependent, for example, we need recognition. Like we developed a theory and we want to bring it into science, that we need a recognition. If I have my theory and I can dwell on it myself and don't need recognition, I'm independent. So, or in the other things, which in the other aspects, like if you want to raise capital, we are interdependent with other mindsets. And I also like to come back to Wittgenstein with a model which I took with me since long, also from his language theory. We have to consider every person and every mind as a world, and we can visualize it like the world is like flat, like in the Greek mythology or something. So all these worlds overlap with other worlds, and in those overlaps there is the opportunity for understanding. But in the core of it, the non-overlapping part, there is our, let's say, inexplicable self. He came up with this idea before he went back to one of his Eremitages phases. I think after that he lived for about 6 years in the wilderness. And there we are like the interdependence sort of like brings the challenge and the subjectivity. If I just have a mythology and things and I'm not interdependent, I agree there is independence. Hermann, you shake your head.
Well, it was good old Stephen Covey who once said that only truly independent people can become interdependent. Yet when I think about our intellectual development, I believe it needs stimulus to grow, to learn, to develop. And that comes not only through our own observations, but also what we listen to from others. And that's where, for me, a certain interdependence comes in.
Yeah. We can't get our mythology without interdependence with the others. Who teaches us the right way to think, and what is the right way? Who guides us? Yeah.
If you look at mentorship, a true mentorship, not mentorship in the old days where the old person told the young person what to do and how to do it. For me, who is involved in mentorship, for me that today is a completely a relationship of equals. And I learn in my conversations with young people just as much as they hopefully learn from me. So, and I think we both kind of widen our cognitive kind of capacities, developing our intellect. So that for me is based on an independent relationship as long as it lasts. But I don't want to make that an issue. I'd like to get some feedback. But that's the way I see it.
I think from my perspective on this whole question of independence and interdependence, I mean, Herman, what you now talked about with the mentorships, I'm wondering, is that, or maybe also I can relate that back to this idea of like, homeschooling and developing the concepts of processing information or coming up with ideas and concepts. So from my perspective, there is like life that happens to us, which is like a lot of information that that we just perceive, and then there's this filter we have and the way we deal with that information. And I think, intellectual dependence is very related to having those filters, having those ways of dealing with that. But then I'm wondering, in conversation with other people, for example, is that in the end just basically more and different information that comes in, which we also take then and process. So is that really like, are we interdependent in that moment, or is that just a different kind of information that also that we perceive and that we process and that we take, and where basically we need or want to have the tools to turn that into a new coherent worldview and like adjust the way we look at the world.
So just another thought jumping on that is again thinking of, is it right? Because I feel like we all have a weight of approval to the word independence, and dependence seems bad, right? We want to strive towards to be independent, and I think it follows a philosophy, if we could call it the 20th century philosophy of this idea that we're all units, complete individuals alone in the world, create our own luck and our destiny, versus I think a philosophy that's being more and more accepted of an ecosystem of everything affecting everything, and that we do not exist outside of the system. We live inside of it, and this ideal of the independence is not only maybe not so accurate and that we'll never reach it, but maybe that we shouldn't. Maybe that's not what we should try. We should strive to be good, or strive to be just, and to have our beliefs and opinions kind of harbored and anchored in truth and reality, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're independent. So maybe the concept itself may be a little confusing because it belongs to a different paradigm, maybe, that it's changing. That and ecosystem thinking approaches that we are dependent and interdependent, and that is good. That is nature. This is how we are. It's why what we eat affects how we think. You know, it's all connected, which is something intellectually I think we struggle with to accept that, and we want to reject that idea. But it's more about the how we integrate new ideas and opinions. It should be a very clear and transparent process. And then, do we integrate opinions from other people? Of course we do. So that's just a kind of a concept of is it something we want? is it an ideal we strive to?
I don't think that there is any mental growth possible without stimulus. The stimulus must come from somewhere. And I agree 100%. I mean, the biggest success today is in co-creation. And yet, maybe it requires, let's say, fundamentally independent people with enough insight to say, hey, yes, I'm a fairly well put together person, but I think I can be a lot more effective with and through others. And that may be what we could consider as interdependence. But as I said, maybe the foundation is a strong individual kind of capacity, whether it's intellectual independence or other independencies. But ultimately, the expression of that independence is best done in what you refer to as ecosystems. Thank you.
May I? Yeah, this topic of ecosystems just comes like around the corner, and it's striking me. It's very interesting, and I have this maybe strange idea, but so the multitude or the synergy of independent minds is an interdependent web or consistency plane where something independent can develop. Like, it is not independent, but it is not dependent on one single individual, but like thoughts, ideas, Weltgeist or whatever emerges out of minds, but is not dependent on one single mind, but is dependent on the multitude of these minds. Speaking of an interdependency, and this is kind of magic. There's a kind of mystic magic aspect in intellectual independency, that if there is enough of it, we become interdependent and something new can emerge. This is
maybe I'm also struggling to describe this, and Hermann earlier said something about maybe independence is a necessary precondition for interdependence. Maybe there's this strange quantum state-like thing here going on, where we cannot be interdependent unless there are discrete things to be dependent on. And if you're independent, then you're also discrete. So being independent and thereby being a discrete part of the whole is the necessary precondition to be able to take part in an interdependent system. Weird stuff.
We're not. I think it makes a lot of sense what you just said, at least for me. Sorry, I shouldn't generalize it. For me, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
And I'd like to add one more that Lihi said very early in our discussion today, which is the emotional aspect. So if we accept that intellectual independence has the potential to come with with a certain way of suffering when your coherence breaks down, then this requires you to be emotionally stable. And so maybe the independence is not from other entities in and their intellectual capacity, but more between the layers of yourself, so that you the independence is of an independence of other parts of yourself, like your emotional part or your physical part, like Hermann said earlier. If we become independent of our emotional state in our intellectual acting and thinking and presence, then this might also lead to some even maybe reciprocal form of independence within ourselves.
Yet isn't this not the emotional independence and not the intellectual? Or do they meet there?
I think they.
You know, Thomas, what I like about these meetings, they leave me with a hell of a lot more questions than answers.
One thought that now came up when you spoke, Thomas, was the question, what we want to be independent from. Like I think originally in my mind it was a lot about being independent from others and from something outside, but what you now said triggered this feeling, okay, actually it's about independence from something in ourselves, from like a certain belief and certain desires, or even the desires to fit in with others. But in the end, it feels like it's about creating this independence in yourself from things that are already part of you and inside you.
I want to even bring a certain aspect of dependency in. I don't want to be dependent on any toxicity in whatever shape or form, but I have no objections of being dependent on input that allows me to widen my own point of view. And I think, Thomas, you touched on it earlier, that in a way requires to admit what we don't know. And on top of it, there are a lot of things we don't know that we don't know. And kind of getting exposed to the eye-opener in that context, I think what allows for personal growth and achieving a certain level of independence. I don't know whether it makes sense, but
But in my experience, the strongest triggers I've experienced were the ones that were the most painful. And so inviting in even toxicity as a way of building anti-fragility in your pattern making and coherence making machine might be an interesting take. I totally get what you say. Emotionally, I'm very I have a hard time staying independent when there's toxicity, but on an intellectual level, I think it's sometimes very useful.
What do you mean by toxicity?
Toxicity.
Toxicity. Mm-hmm.
So
Easy to hurt.
how toxic.
Is the reason for you because if there's toxicity on an intellectual level that you feel challenged and start seeking? Is that a
Yes.
possible trigger?
Yes, absolutely. Because I always have to assume that underneath the emotional layers of that toxicity, there's a kernel of truth. And I have to follow that and try to make sense of it and integrate it and understand it. And that integrating it makes me more anti-fragile in my intellectual independence, but not in my emotional.
It's a
Well,
discovery.
I'm pleased you say that because, quite frankly, again, I've shared certain things on some occasions. The toxicity, the emotional toxicity I was exposed to as a child has hampered me as a person for many, many years, long into my adulthood. An experience I don't wish on anybody, because for me personally, that did not bring growth. It's stifled my growth.
Yeah. It's these memories which trigger off reactions in us. We have to overcome these mechanisms by discovery, forgiving, and not just like superficial forgiving, just the growing over it. Yeah. It's a timeless process, actually.
But for some of us, and that there I speak out of personal experience, it also leads to escape.
Oh yeah, very much.
I mean, I had a serious alcoholic problem for a large part of my life because of that. I'm not blaming. I mean, I did the drinking, so it's nobody pushed it down my throat. But it was for me the only escape I had, getting away from those emotional wounds.
Or stay back, or run away from people, or try to change location. You can't run away from yourself and from this encounter, which we are talking about today, I think. So we can go back and read Lao Tzu, right?
Falk, I think Lihi has been trying to speak. Let's give her some space. Thank you.
Sorry, I've been trying formulate also, so it's not like I was, but I feel like if I want to kind of summarize the key separate issues that I think we're talking about in parallel, is on the one hand, just the skill and the ability of critical thinking, which is maybe something we want to teach our children or teach ourselves and understand on how to accept new information and be critical and skeptical about it and then slowly integrate it if it follows, which is kind of an intellectual skill, versus the emotional kind of triggers we have around what we see when we think of someone who is not intellectually independent, like we see the masses, or we see kind of herd behavior, and it's scary, and it brings up this concern or fear, and it could be on any side you are. You see a big voice that seems like they're not following the path of critical thinking, and what would it mean? Which is a fear, I think, that that motivates us. And then there's the other hand, which I think we mentioned now, when there is this kind of mass, our other need to be part of the collective, to be accepted, to be in a group and in a community, we can't have that when there's a herd thinking that is dangerous, and so then we have this emotional clash, or so it's just like, I think, three different issues that influence a lot of the discussion on what it means to be intellectually independent, if it's possible, and maybe what it means if you're not, and what are the implications if these values of critical thinking are not integrated in society. What can happen, which I think is scary. And the flip side of it, the forgiveness, I think, for me, has to do a lot with empathy. So just on a personal note, I live in many places, and we talk, my escape is you have to move. Because if any of you have been to Israel, it is emotionally charged, and it is very difficult to be in the consensus without having your heart and soul and mind broken by the masses and challenged all the time about identity and what does it mean. And on the other hand, there is a pull to have a home, to speak your language, but you cannot be part of that group if they do. So I think that it connects to me to that kind of question of being part of society and being critical, and how do we create societies that can be critical of themselves all the time. Sorry if that was a little mixed up.
They're kind of like a cultural independence, right? A way for a whole society to be intellectually independent.
Well, to value and teach and promote critical thinking. I don't know if it's independence, but to think, to think, is this true? Is this true? Is this right? That needs to be, cultural value, questioning, and for it to be integrated in society. It will, if we don't put an emphasis on it, it won't. I think.
Just want to drop in one word about this. So it's maybe not an independent society, but it's a society in which all individuals are aware of their duty to be responsibly dependent, to be kind of achtsam. I don't know the word in English right now.
Mindful.
Mindfully dependent as a society. So like to say, like, don't know. This just came into my mind. So in a society, you are never completely independent, because you are in the society. So, but the closer it can get there, closest to the state of independence it can get is to be mindfully dependent with each other. Don't know. Sorry.
I'd like to build on something Feik was saying earlier about the overlap of the worlds in which agreement can happen. I don't know if I remember it totally. I have the feeling that we today were trying to move around the edges of that space. So we didn't move out into the total in the space where you understand it becomes impossible. But we moved at the borders of where understanding slowly becomes impossible or more difficult. And I really enjoyed that. Since we are unfortunately getting to our 90 minutes line here today, I want to honor all of our evenings wherever we are in the world. I'd like to gently bring it to a closing here, although there are so many open thoughts and ends in everybody's mind. I can see that. For Lihi and Till, since this is your first time participating, you will receive an email inviting you into a Roam graph. Roam is a tool for associative storing of stuff. And some stuff stored there are the posts that I'm posting, and also some future posts. And you can follow while I'm writing them and help me write them if you like. But also these recordings and also past recordings and future recordings. So this is a space that we can use. Feel free to add whatever you want to add. You have full editing rights for anything you write. You cannot change or delete anything other people write. We will have a little break next week, but after that we will go into a space that Hermann opened today, which is deep personal autobiographical vignettes with a lot of experience, maybe some on the dark side, some on the light side, and I will open those with a couple of personal vignettes that'll come out next week. Okay, so thank you all for showing up. It was really amazing. And if you want to share something, then let's do this now. Share something and open your mic, or I close the session.
I've got one question.
Thank you.
I've written a little speech about 6 minutes on build bridges, not walls, which very much reflects on what I touched on earlier. I'd like to kind of present that in that session in 2 weeks' time, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the next 3 sessions will be overviewing, which is what happens if you are thrown outside of your social sphere. So you can have an overview effect, kind of like astronauts experience of your social sphere as an outsider. And about rewriting the contents of your mind autopoietically. That's the second session, and then about dealing with death as a driving force for life. So wherever you feel this fits in, Herman, feel free to put it in.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you. Have a wonderful
lot.
evening.
Thank you guys so much.
Everyone. Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye.